He swung a frying pan at Cassie's head. He's accused of setting Kid Cudi's car on fire. Usher, Neo, Dawn Rashad, so many saw the horrors and said nothing. Bribes, threats, secret rendezvous, drugs, NDAs. Women were unprotected. He was untouchable until now. I am here joined with my co-host, criminal behavioral analyst Laura Richards in the house, and special guest, former CIA spy, Andrew Bustamante. Welcome, guys.
So much has happened, right?
Yeah, so much has happened. And we really want to start with Regina Ventura's testimony. That is Cassie's mum. So talk to me, Laura, about why you feel like this is such a pivotal testimony.
Yeah, I think she gave very strong and compelling testimony, in particular around an email that she received from Cassie, which basically said, the threats that have been made towards me by Sean Puffy Combs are that he is going to release 2 explicit sex tapes of me, one on Christmas Day, maybe before or right after, and another one sometime soon after that. He has also said that he will be having someone hurt me and Scott Muscudi physically. He made a point that it wouldn't be by his hands. He actually said he'd be out of the country when it happened. Now, the time date stamp of that is December the 23rd, 2011, right? And so this is a very important piece of evidence. We call this prima facie evidence, that it's an email between the two. Cassie is terrified because there's coercion here. So we have to think about that coercion. She's terrified that he's going to release 2 explicit sex tapes around Christmas, and that he is going to physically hurt her, not himself, but he's going to get other people to hurt her, and also Scott Muscudi, who's Kid Cudi, who we heard from this week as well. And that was someone she was dating for a short period of time. And what we know now from Kid Cudi's testimony on Thursday was that his car was basically arsoned, set on fire, an explosion, and he had a break into his property in the December 2011. So I'm very focused on timeline, time, date, stamps. He said he was going to do something, and then something happened. It just shows this coercion, this exploitation, the fact that he's prepared to do anything, and that he has this real feeling of possession, entitlement, and ownership towards Cassie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I see this, the first thing that jumps out to me is the calculation, right? This is not something that Cassie's mom made up. These are very significant days with very significant consequences. Why release a video on Christmas Day? Because it's shocking, it's countercultural, it's that much more intimidating because of the scheduled event, right? And then when he talks about hurting Kid Cudi, it's not just that he's threatening with physical harm, he's talking about doing it in a way that is premeditated and calculated so that he is absent, essentially beyond the reach of what could be future legal consequences, right? The thought of premeditated violence that goes into the current threat is significant because it's showing that this isn't him just losing his temper, this isn't him not knowing what he's doing, this isn't the first time he's made a threat like this. How many hours, how many nights, how many days has he played this out in his head before he actually says it out loud?
But how much of this can the defense say it's just coincidence?
Well, they're going to say that, right? They're going to say, but it's not Sean Combs. And in fact, what they did say was there was DNA found on the car and it was female DNA. Well, that's totally irrelevant. That could be anyone's DNA, right? And it depends what the DNA is, where it was found. But the fact that Sean Combs isn't going to do this physically himself, you know, the prosecution planted the flag. And Cassie's mum was only on for 15 to 20 minutes. They're being very selective and focused. They're not bringing people on to testify and it's war and peace. They're going for specific things. This is about the arson charge. This is about the potential criminal enterprise, the racketeering. This is what they're trying to prove by putting Regina on. But also, she gave very clear testimony about when this threat came in, they remortgaged their home to get $20,000. And you had a bookkeeper from Sean Combs' side setting up that wire transfer, right? So now you've got somebody else from his business, the criminal enterprise. You need 2 acts, 2 people. So Cassie Ventura's mum was really powerful, I think, of saying, well, we even paid this money and here are the transactions. It's not disputable, right? It's there in evidence.
The challenge is definitely going to come down to the prosecution being able to tie it to intent. right? Because even here with the $20,000 that her parents paid off, there's a history where Cassie herself actually said, Sean accused me that I owed him money, which could be interpreted to be not part of a criminal enterprise, but part of an outstanding personal debt. And the whole way that a courtroom is kind of orchestrated, especially in the US, is it's a show, right? This idea of who is the character of Diddy, who is the character of Cassie, who are the various characters in the story along with them, and where do they intersect and why?
The thing is, though, so last week we actually covered Cassie's testimony. So she was on the stand all week. We covered that. How much of it is part of Diddy's power was that he had her mum wrapped up in this? Because if it was me, I'm just going to project. If it was me, the thought of now my mum being involved and my family makes it that much harder.
You know, we have to remember that one of Cassie's biggest fears was the videos being released of her on these sex tapes, but also her mum seeing them. You know, we care a lot about what our family, when we're close to them, we care about what they think. Here, she's having to involve her mum. I mean, this is such a difficult thing for a daughter to write to a mum and for a mum to see. And the fact that mum sees Sean Combs for who he is, and I did understand that she glared at him as she left court. Oh. Yeah, she gave him a very strong look, was what I was told from the people within the court. You know, she's mama bear here. But we do care about what our loved ones think of us. And Sean Combs, would he have thought that Cassie would make this move? I don't know. I don't think so. Because remember, Cassie had said, well, don't release those tapes. I don't want my mum to see them. Oh, your mum's going to see these. He made a point of keep saying it. And in a sense, she's taken the power away from Sean Combs by letting mum know and dad know that she's in this situation. And more so, mum also testified about bruises and things that she saw on Cassie. And I heard her say that she wanted to document those things. She was the one taking photos to document them because one day they may well be needed. But Sean Combs knows what he's doing, in my opinion. There's intention behind what he says and what he does, but he follows it up with action.
All right, so if someone's listening at home, because I know it's very important for us to really kind of help women that may be stuck in this situation, because not everyone's stuck with someone as powerful as Diddy, but there are many women that are still trapped in these types of dynamics. What advice would you give somebody if they're in this situation where maybe someone's threatening to tell their family and they're so worried about, you know, the shame and embarrassment? What is the one thing they can do to overcome that? And then what's the encouragement on the need and necessity of sharing this information?
I mean, my advice would be tell those people, get out the gate first. As upsetting, distressing, you know, shame, humiliation, all those things that keep someone entrapped. But you take the abuser's power away when you speak truth to your power. That would be my advice. And it means that you don't get stuck in that spider's web. You know, that is often the biggest fear for victims of, you know, being seen in a certain way or the abuser outing them for something. That is often the thing that keeps them entrapped. With Cassie, I believe it was the tapes and the fear of violence. So take the power away from that person, as scary as that might be. When we're being abused and subject to abuse, our worlds get smaller and smaller and smaller. So talking out about it, you don't feel like you are hopeless and helpless. You do have some autonomy and agency to do that, even though it feels really frightening.
Yeah, there's two really important elements for anybody who's experiencing something like this. And the first is very much what Laura's talking about. We have a saying at CIA, the person who breaks the news controls the news, right? The first person to share a story controls the story. Everybody else is just contributing to the original story. So if you let them control the story, it doesn't matter what you have to say after they've said their piece first. So you want to be the first one to speak, because then anything they say that contradicts or differs from what you said is interpreted as less valid because you were the one that broke the news. So that's the first important thing to line up with what Laura's saying. Share it, tell someone, get it out there, document it, because you set the narrative. But the second thing is that Diddy clearly shows signs of sociopathy. He doesn't adhere to the rules, being a sociopath.
What's the definition then, if someone's just listening?
So for a sociopath is someone who lacks empathy and doesn't believe that the rules adhere to them. That's different than a narcissist who lacks empathy but believes that validation, personal validation or recognition is the most important thing. A sociopath doesn't care about personal recognition necessarily. They might, but it's not a driving force. The driving force is that they do not believe that they have to conform to social norms. They do not believe that the rules apply to them. When you're in a relationship with somebody who is a sociopath, you start to believe the world through their eyes. So when they say the rules don't apply to them, you start to think the rules don't apply to them, but they do apply to me, right? And that becomes very dangerous, because if you start to see the world as they see the world, you're not seeing it for what it really is, right? And rule of law is out there, and justice is out there, and safety is out there. But as long as you keep yourself in proximity with that person, with them controlling the news, it's hard to get out of it.
So, because one of the rules, I guess, that allegedly that has been rumored to be out there is that Diddy was dating like 5 different people. And then the fact that the rules don't apply to him, she wasn't allowed to see anyone. So she wasn't allowed now going to Kid Cudi, which was part of it, where Diddy was dating 5 different people, and yet she wasn't allowed to date anybody.
Yeah, so Kid Cudi was dating Cassie for a short period of time. And this was when things were not going well with Sean Combs. He was still dating lots of other women. He carried on, but he had a big problem with ownership, entitlement, possession. He felt Cassie was his woman. And that's what he said to Kid Cudi when they actually met, which was initiated by Kid Cudi because he wanted to just squash this beef and wanted to question him about the firebomb, etc. And so they met at Soho House. And he said he didn't know anything about the car, Sean Combs said, but he did say, come on, my homie, she's my woman. But what we do know is that Kid Cudi stopped the relationship. The relationship dissipated because of Sean Combs's, Kid Cudi called it drama. I would call it very serious criminal allegations and offences in terms of what he's prepared to do to derail a relationship. But there's one set of rules for Cassie, and there's no rules for Sean Combs. And I think when they first got together, when Cassie didn't understand that, she was just going along the lines of normal interactions in relationships, he said, I'm Puff Daddy. I'm Puff Daddy and I have many rules, i.e. you have to adhere to these rules, I have none. And lots of people called him king, and he called it his kingdom. So there was this constant power play going on. And that's the double standard I always see with, I call them coercive controllers. You know, and the difference for me of psychopaths and sociopaths, one's born, one's made. You know, the psychopath is born. It's a gene that we know that they have that can be expressed, right? And we call them stone cold psychopaths because there's no emotional component. But we have to remember with Sean Combs, there was a lot of drug use, and that can change, you know, how somebody expresses themselves in terms of violence when there's drugs or any kind of substance misuse or abuse. And we know that that played a part here. So for me, Sean Combs, yes, he kind of blew up, but he created this kingdom, and that it was his rules, my way or the highway. And Cassie, we've talked about that power imbalance, you know, so she might interpret the whole Kid Cudi thing of, oh, well, he loves me. Sean Combs is doing this because he loves me. He wants to be with me. You know, this is how far he's going to go to prove, or she might feel this is terrifying. I've got to do everything that he's going to say, or there could be a mixture of those two things. But quite often it brings that person back into that abuse and back to the abuser, and that trauma bond. You know, we can't negate the trauma bond of her to Sean Combs.
The prosecution is, again, trying to set up a story, and they need to set a tone of criminal activity. They must, because the charges that they're pursuing are criminal charges. And as much as we may not like the way it sounds or feels personally, the truth is, this is the justice system. This is not the system of morals or ethics or personal feelings, right? It is the justice system, and the justice system has specific guidelines and boundaries. That jury wasn't artificially selected. They were cultivated. The majority of the jury is over the age of 50. There's a handful that are in their middle age, between 40 and 60. They have to have an unbiased approach to...
Only 4 of them are women?
They have to have an unbiased approach to the case, which means they're largely ignorant of the case. That's the people who have to make the final decision on whether or not this is criminal activity or not. And then the prosecution is pursuing very specific criminal charges. They're not pursuing domestic abuse charges. They're pursuing criminal racketeering, trafficking of sex, and prostitution across state borders. That's what they're actively trying to prove. They can't come out of the gates with evidence in those areas because the evidence they have most likely isn't like rock solid. They have to build a case. So the whole idea of showing that Diddy could be involved in this arson element shows he's willing to commit very clear property crime, which is an indicator that he's probably prepared to carry out other types of crime too.
So how much of a possibility, though, can he hide behind the fact that he didn't do it? Because going back to the shooting in that club back in the day with J-Lo, when I think about the woman testified, I saw Sean P. Diddy shoot me in the face. Someone else said, no, I did it, and Diddy got off scot-free. So how much of even the arson, having that email saying, well, he would say he wasn't there, like, do we have actual legs to be able to, I know allegedly he hasn't been proven, but are there any actual legs there?
If you want, I mean, from my point of view, we are lacking a lot of evidence. For actual demonstrable proof that an entire jury would agree to, we haven't seen that evidence yet. And if you look at our history of organized crime, because racketeering is organized crime. It's crime for profit, right? We have a long history in the United States of organized crime bosses getting off scot-free. Somebody else becomes a scapegoat, somebody else takes the jail time, somebody else makes a claim, and there's just enough question in the evidence that they're able to do that. So there is a possible reality where Sean Combs walks out of this scot-free. There's a reality. Whether the probability is low or high, we have yet to see how it's going to play out. But based on the evidence that's been presented so far, they're still just trying to make us believe this guy's a criminal. This guy even has criminal intent. They haven't actually laid forth yet any glowing evidence that he is perpetrating these crimes with intention, with planning, and with documentation of bookkeeping or documentation of hidden journals or hidden exchanges of money, which is all going to be required to show trafficking and to show racketeering.
Okay, so let's actually now move on to the Punisher, who is the exotic dancer, is what he titles himself. And Cassie called him and used the alias name Janet. Apparently, he didn't know that it was P. Diddy and Cassie for over a year, that Diddy was sitting at least 10 feet away. He was kind of shouting these commands, but he had no idea. In everything that I heard gearing up to it, I thought there was going to be some crazy stories. I thought this is going to be, oh my God, he's going to be the person that's going to say Diddy held her down, like there was some force. And then I heard the testimony. I was like, look, it just sounds like a very sexually active man who has these crazy, wild desires. I didn't see any criminal thing around that. And I'd love to hear from you guys.
Well, we have to remember that 2 of the charges are about sex trafficking, which is, in this context, commercial sex for where there's fear, fraud, or coercion, right? So we have heard testimony that Cassie was forced to do the freak-offs at different points. Some of them were consensual, and other times she said no, and then Sean Combs said he would release the tapes, as we have just discussed. And the Punisher comes in and effectively says that he was procured. What we're interested in is who's giving him the money. So, and we hear testimony that it's Sean Combs who is actually giving the money, putting wads of cash on the bed, masturbating in the background, directing the 2 of them. And we also hear, he says that he didn't think Cassie there was a level of discomfort, I think, with the words. But then the prosecutor put us straight by saying, but you did say that she winced a lot. The fact that he gave testimony that she did wince and he didn't really think anything of that. Well, we did hear that Cassie had UTIs, she was on her period sometimes, but when you have UTIs, it's very painful. No one wants to have sex with a UTI. I'm sorry, you just do not. And physically, it is so painful. So when we put ourselves in that context, we have to understand that she might be saying yes, and she's doing it, but there are threats behind it as to what will happen. There's a fear of consequence. Now that is the coercion. So what the prosecution are doing are bringing people on to corroborate Cassie's testimony. Some things are much more subtle, right? But that's where the closing comes in, because it's like building a house. You've got to put the foundation in, or even knitting a jumper, right? You don't see the full sweater or jumper at the start, line by line, and then you start to see the big picture. And for me, that's what the prosecution are doing. That was the testimony from the Punisher. It wasn't about being sensationalist, and even the title, I talked about it before, Punisher, it conjures up really horrible things as far as I'm concerned. When I have an intimate act of sex with somebody, it's not about punishment, so it sets a tone of what maybe Diddy is telling him to do to her and her to do to him. The jury did see 7 pictures. They were shocked by what they saw. And I believe the Punisher wasn't this sensational testimony that people thought it might be, but he, in my view, did the job of corroborating some of the things that Cassie Ventura had talked about.
Yeah, that was the main goal of having his testimony, I agree, is being able to further make the jury doubt Diddy Combs and make them have faith in Cassie, right? So his testimony, I think, was a surprise to a lot of people because it wasn't overtly criminal. It wasn't necessarily overtly abusive. It had these questions, these tones, these nuances, but it absolutely helped to solidify Cassie's position as someone telling the truth and Diddy's position as someone who does not necessarily respect his partner, the rules, the laws. But again, what they have to prove is fraud, coercion, or fear in this idea of prostitution across state lines. We have no idea whether or not the evidence amounts to that, because if he was paid, if it was overt, if he was willing and consented, if there was any question, unfortunately we live in a world where a jury is going to say, if there was questionable consent, it's still consent, right? We're not in a world yet where the jury is going to default to supporting the female idea. They're going to default to, did she specifically say no? Or at least that's what the defense is going to try to make it sound like.
But remember, we only need 2 acts. So she may have consented 10 times, but 2 of the times she didn't. Those 2 times are what's relevant. You just need 2 times where there was a fear, i.e. that a tape was going to be released and that's why she did the freak off. Or remember LA, the Intercontinental Hotel, the 2016, Cassie is leaving and he forced her to do a freak off that time. That's what she said. And then he beats her up and we all see it on camera.
Right,
so we know there's a genuine fear. So you only need 2 of those occasions.
And again, this is going to be very difficult for a jury because Cassie is the one pressing charges. Cassie is the one that has something to gain financially at the end of this. Cassie is the one on the stand. Cassie is the one potentially going to get immunity for her actions. So how can you trust the testimony of that person if they are your sole example of trafficking?
My morning routine is everything to me because it sets my day up to be able to go and freaking crush it. But let's face it, sometimes habits and routines can get a little boring, especially when it comes to food. All I end up eating is eggs and bacon for breakfast until I discovered the amazing chocolate protein powder from Bilyeu. Now, they actually come in different flavors, but I can't believe that I get to eat this for breakfast. I get my 13 grams of protein that I need in the morning, and I also get to have chocolate for breakfast. It sets my day up to be absolutely amazing. I get all the energy. It doesn't have gluten, it doesn't have soy, it doesn't have dairy, it doesn't upset my stomach, but it still has the protein and the flavor that allows me to go and enjoy my day and freaking crush it. And right now, guys, they're actually offering buy one, get one free. So you can just click the link below and get yours right now. Cheers. So 2 things. Number one was people are really fixating on that Diddy paid, I think, was it $20 million? And so everyone now dismisses whether it's true or not. Please help me understand why on earth it would take 2 times. It's not like you have to kill 2 people to go to prison. You do it once, it's a criminal offense, you get arrested. So why on earth would you have to prove it twice?
Often with legislation, you do get 2 acts, 2 people. Right, so even with the coercive control law, the stalking law in England and Wales, but also across the country, and bringing it into America, it's 2 acts, 2 behaviours of coercive control, 2 of stalking. The same here with racketeering and RICO and criminal enterprise, 2 people, i.e. it's not just Sean Combs, he's the head of the business, but it's not the business that's on trial, right? It's Sean Combs, and then you have to see people within his organisation who are assisting, who are enabling, who are actively covering up and playing a part. And with legislation, you do have to make it very clear what the points to prove are. And that's why. 2 means it's a pattern, right? So it's quite different. We say serial killer after 2. So there is continuity and consistency, but the laws, obviously, most oftentimes they're created by men for men. So they don't necessarily reflect lived experience. And that's why bringing the coercive control law here to America and making it a criminal law is important. And the fact that she was paid through the 35-page lawsuit that she filed, we've talked about that before, but the civil justice route is exactly for accountability. And it's up to those 2 parties to figure out what the the compensation, the restitution, what the settlement looks like. And we have to remember, Sean Combs initially said that anyone filing lawsuits, they're gold diggers, they're out for a payday. He absolutely, he said, had never committed these horrific allegations and events. That's what he said in his initial statement. The lawsuit then is settled within 24 hours. When someone settles that quickly, boom, they're trying to hide something. I mean, without a doubt. He wanted to then put out a statement to say, there's still no foundation to what she said. And then the video comes out where we all see in May exactly what he did. Then he puts out a statement, the apology, non-apology, as I call it. I mean, the words and the language you have a field day with, because it's very clear that he's making excuses for what he did. He's apologizing, but all the time before, there's no consistency. He's the one changing the story. So I want people to be looking at his change in his story. She has been consistent. She was consistent in the lawsuit. There was corroborating people that we've heard from all week that talked about specific events that Cassie talked about in her lawsuits. They've corroborated. He is the one that's been inconsistent in his storytelling of no, I didn't do it, absolutely not, gold digger, payday, how dare they, enough is enough. And then suddenly we get this teary Sean Combs on a video of, this is my darkest time, I had the worst time, and we have to reflect on our behavior, and that's what I'm doing, and I'm not looking for excuses, but that's exactly what he was doing, and I'm truly sorry for my disgusting behavior. The only time he admits to it is when his back is against the wall. He does not take responsibility any other way. So that's why the civil lawsuit was important, and so is this criminal trial. And it's not Cassie bringing this trial, it's the government.
The point about setting a pattern is very important, right? We in the United States, we don't want to leave this up to doubt. And the whole idea behind a jury is to be convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt, right? To show that there is almost irrefutable evidence by a panel of your peers. That is our justice system. That means you can't just let one person's opinion one time, one act, one mistake, one error, one whatever stand on its own. You have to show that pattern. That pattern is very important. Even if that pattern has decades between its repetition, that's why different laws have different lengths of validity, right? And to the point that the investigation is being driven by Homeland Security, by HSI, who's actually driving this and really pushing this forward, it's because they're trying to make what is a very difficult case of not just racketeering, but racketeering conspiracy. Conspiracy means it's bigger than one person. So all anybody's talking about is one person, but the charge is racketeering conspiracy. So who are the other conspirators? Right? And that's a big open question that nobody's talking about right now. And when you look at the testimony and the case that's being built so far, the sweater that's being built from the ground up, if you will, we haven't gotten to the conspiracy piece yet. Right now, it's just Cassie's trustworthy, Diddy is not. Cassie is stable, Diddy is not. Cassie is a victim, Diddy looks like, in many cases, an abuser of women, an abuser of power, an abuser of finances, an abuser of property, right?
Okay, so now let's go to actually then David James, who was his personal assistant, because I think this is where a lot of things come out that could be somewhat part of what you were just talking about with the conspiracy, and it's a bigger thing than just Diddy himself. So he told a story that he went to a New Year's Eve party. He was working with Diddy for a long time. He goes to this New Year's Eve party. He doesn't normally do drugs. It was the first time he does drugs. And the next day he sees Diddy just watching all the video footage from this crazy New Year's Eve party that he has. No one else was allowed to shoot anything on his phone, so he has all the recorded footage. And as he's watching Diddy watching this footage, he turned around to him and said, "I want to keep this footage in case I ever need it." Now, at the time, he perceived that as a potential threat, that it was going to be used as a potential bribe, allegedly. He was the one that went and set up the hotel rooms that they would call, he would advance the hotel rooms. And in that, he would make sure that there was food, toiletries, a medicine bag, a Louis Vuitton bag that had $10,000 worth of cash every time, and it allegedly had drugs like pills, Viagra, and Percocet.
Well, I think the first point that you make, that shows intention, that he's thinking about it, and leverage, right? We saw that with Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein, that he would have leverage on people, on powerful people. And here we've got a testimony that says, well, he wanted to keep this sensitive, thing that I was doing. He wanted to find that, and then he was going to hold it over my head, blackmail, coercion. That's what it's sowing the seed of, right? And we've seen that with Cassie, the freak-offs held over her head, the coercion, the threats, the exploitation. So I think it talks to that. But David James also testified that when he was on his interview, they said to him that this was Sean Combs's kingdom and that we are here to serve in it. So they're already setting that he has the power, Sean Combs does. We're here to serve, the language of obedience, of protection, but of loyalty. And so you've already got this power play. And I would imagine, for James, it felt he was in a very vulnerable position. And that's how you keep people controlled. And that's how you can use in a criminal enterprise, much like Keith Raniere did with NXIVM, a cult. He used the cult, which NXIVM was meant to put good into the world, help people, but he had his lieutenants and other people do things, and he used them to do his bidding. And that's where the criminal enterprise, the racketeering, comes in. So I think David James's testimony was powerful for lots of different reasons on those 2 points, but there were other things too.
David was the one that had to go through multiple polygraphs, if I recall correctly.
Yes, well done, correct.
So he went through a series of 2 different polygraphs after different incidences occurred where Diddy doubted his loyalty or faith. One was a theft of jewelry, I think a watch. Another was a theft of money. I think money went missing. And in both cases, David took a polygraph and passed the polygraph, and the polygrapher was a retired FBI polygrapher. So what's interesting to me is again, looking at this through the eyes of the jury, because that's, if you want to have the clearest idea of what might happen, you must look at the case through the lens of the jury. This 4 female, male-dominated jury of older generation people who are disconnected from Diddy, which means they're not rap listeners, they're not, watching e-news, they're not watching, entertainment news, they're not keeping up with the case over the last 2 years. Like, where they dug these people up is a little bit concerning, right? But through their lens, they're seeing a guy give a testimony, and they have to ask themselves, is he biased one way or the other, right? Is he pro-Diddy or is he pro-Cassie, or is he just pro-protect his own ass, right? He kept the job, he didn't quit. Even after going through 2 very stressful polygraphs, he still stayed. Why would he stay? And was he doing what an assistant would do, right? Some of it was criminal activity, like moving drugs, but Combs is not on trial for moving drugs. He's on trial for conspiracy for racketeering and for trafficking and for prostitution across state borders, right? How did David make those things happen? Or did David not make those things happen? Where's the evidence to support the case at hand? And it makes me very curious what the close will be, because the fact that we haven't seen anybody else as a defendant yet makes me wonder if they're going to pull the other conspirators out, but the other conspirators have already received some kind of deal where they will be protected or possibly even immune when they give the really stark, flaming evidence.
Okay, I want to move on now to something that's just so heartbreaking. I heard Don Richard's testimony, or at least the report of it. And so she's the person that was in Danity Kane, and she had witnessed Diddy punching Cassie, and she said that people like Usher were there, Neo, these celebrities. Help me think through that, because as a woman, I'm going to be very honest, and again, I may be naive, so please help me navigate this. But as a woman, if I felt threatened, I would be like, well, at least there's other people in the room. Because I would expect, I would naturally expect that if, God forbid, my husband Tom was to hit me, that one of you guys would be like, whoa, Tom, what the fuck? How does that not happen? When you have other people that are powerful, so it's not just Diddy and everybody else doesn't have wealth or anything like that. Talk to me about that, and how, as a woman, you can even think through protecting yourself when no one else is even willing to protect you.
Yeah, well, there's something called the bystander effect. And so just generally speaking, people don't like to get involved, right? And that's why we have a big problem even when we see someone being assaulted by somebody else. It's quite rare to get someone to intervene or even call the police. So when it happened with Gabby Petito, who was murdered by Brian Laundrie, 2 male witnesses who are independent called 911. That's actually very rare, right? That's what we see. People don't like to get involved. So that dynamic is at play. And I agree with you, Lisa. I would want people to step in and actually do something. But we've got to remember who's the most powerful person in the room. And power, how you hold power, can be lots of different things. It could be Usher doing a record deal, with Sean Combs. They're already in partnership. He doesn't want to rock the boat. And their relationship matters more. And I'm not saying that that's what happened. I'm just giving an example. That they have prioritized their relationship to the abuser. And that's what happens a lot. It might be there's a woman in the room, she doesn't feel that she has any physical agency to stop this. There's lots of things going on at play, but what those people are eyewitnesses at the very least. And we do know that, with Kerry Morgan, who was Cassie's best friend, she did say she asked a security officer, Rubin, to intervene when Cassie was being beaten in view of both of them, and that security officer refused to do anything. Now, that's a slightly different scenario because this is a person working for Sean Combs and he's on contract. There might be something in his contract to say, do not intervene. We don't know what was in it. We don't know how orchestrated this is.
Can you put something like in the contract?
You can put whatever you want in a contract.
Yeah,
right?
You can do, it's what makes a contract a contract. And there's contract law to protect what's in the contract.
So it could say something like, if Sean Diddy Combs becomes physical with anybody, you are not allowed to intervene.
I can almost guarantee you the contract of every employee that works for Diddy has a clause in there that says that anything that could defame his reputation, they are legally required not to express or share, right? Like, I can almost guarantee you that exists.
But isn't that more like an NDA? So like an NDA and a contract that says that if you see Diddy being physical or violent, you cannot intervene.
It would probably say, it could be in either one, right? You could have a contract and then an NDA, which is what a lot of them do in the celebrity world. But it could be something as broad as, you must not get involved in my interpersonal relationships. So when they sign it, they don't really know what that means. But that's what it means in this context, right? So Roger Bonds didn't get involved when Cassie was beaten, very serious beating to the head. He extracted her and put her in a hotel, but he didn't do anything to stop it.
It's also worth mentioning that there are norms, different norms in different cultures and different subcultures, right? The norm in the subculture of the people who were close to Diddy is different than the norm of the subculture of people who were close to you. Perhaps seeing him, do you know where his nickname Puff came from?
No.
Yeah,
Puff
puffing and
Dragon?
puffing, being angry and aggressive.
Oh, really?
Even
I just thought
as
it was
a
weed.
child, even as a child, he was so emotionally volatile that when he got angry, he couldn't control his breathing. So he became Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, right? And even when he changed his name in 2018 to Love, right? You can see that he's trying to distance himself from his own emotional volatility, another sign of a sociopath, and another sign when he got fired from Motown Records. There are two primary reasons that are circulating about why he was fired from Motown. One is that he was unstable and overly passionate, right, about the job. Unprofessional, aggressive, demanding. He went head to head with the CEO multiple times. There's another circulating article that he had an inappropriate sexual misconduct issue with a male who was also part of the record label, right? So in both cases, you've got emotional volatility and sexual misconduct, all the way back to 2009 when he was fired from Motown Records, going forward from there. So this history, this pattern, is very clear, right? It's very clearly there. What was normal for Diddy is not what's normal for the average bear. It's like when you go to someone's house who prays before dinner. You may not pray before dinner, but when they bow their head to pray, guess what you do?
Yeah, so true, you do.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And I grew up in a household with an old school dad. My dad used to beat me with a belt, right? So 1988, I'll never forget, I was beaten with a belt. My mom thought it was normal. My dad thought it was normal. The other people in our little rural community of Pennsylvania all thought that shit was normal. I went to school, the gym teacher saw the bruises in the shape of belts across my body, called the police, and that's the only reason any of that changed, right? But that's just a simple example that many people can relate to. What's normal in one place may not necessarily be acceptable or normal by the law.
Yeah. But then what would you do? So take your Cassie. You've got your friend over. So Dawn Rashad also said that one time she was over and Diddy came down. She was in the middle of cooking. He comes down, said he's mad because he doesn't like what she's cooking, and he grabs a frying pan and tries to hit her over the head and just says, you can't fucking cook. You can't do anything. those types of things, as a woman witnessing, I can understand why you would be fearful, you would be scared, because in all honesty, if it was me, I can't physically protect myself against somebody that's bigger and stronger. I'm very aware of that. But as a woman, if I'm in a room with other people, I feel like, okay, maybe I'm gonna get protected, and now she isn't. Then she breaks up with Diddy, goes out with Kid Cudi, and he leaves her. You mentioned it earlier, it's too much drama. And so now as a woman, the people around you don't protect you. Obviously, your friend's scared to be around you now because she's scared of your boyfriend. You turn to other people, the security guard isn't protecting you, and you now try to move on. You try to go and date, and even they're scared because now he's infiltrating your new relationship. Where on earth do you go with that?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that when you are in a situation where one person suddenly explodes with violence, and it's often targeted violence to another, you don't know how you're going to react until you're in that moment. People think they're going to do A, B, or C, but actually most people will probably do something quite unusual to what they thought that they would do. In front of me, I would absolutely challenge it, and I have done. And that's at great risk and great cost. You know, other people, just because they're not doing it, I wouldn't judge on them for that. I would understand that they know what the risk and what potentially they could be putting their own life in danger. Most people protect themselves first before they're willing to go into bat for someone else. That's where law enforcement and other agencies are amazing. Whilst everyone runs away from the danger, they run towards it, right? And it's so upsetting when you see a friend being beaten like that. But you've got to remember with Danity Kane, she's also tied to Diddy. She was in 2 of his bands. So who holds power? He does, but she knows this is wrong. Now, in terms of friends, because they are the first people who see things or understand that something's going on, or maybe that the victim confides in them, here you've got direct, viewing it, being part of it. It's acknowledging to your friend of what's gone on and letting them speak, and not judging, not telling them what they should do, acknowledging they're in a difficult situation, giving them the right information to talk to experts, because even if someone says you've got to leave him, that's the most dangerous time. So what you think you know about what you might do and what you should say, actually I spend a lot of time teaching and training in those areas, particularly about what you do if your friend, your mum, someone you love is being abused and you know it. And really you want to stay in the relationship, maintain a connection. You don't want to isolate them further. You want to give them the right information. You want to make sure that they're signposted to an expert so that when they choose to leave, it's a planned event, right? And not judging, not blaming. And it's very hard. Kerry Morgan, who was assaulted by Sean Combs, and we heard her testimony.
He tried to choke her, is that correct?
Yeah, and hit her with a hanger. Well, that event and her seeing him be violent and abusive to Cassie ended up, on Sean Combs' behalf, getting her to sign an NDA after she was physically assaulted. Well, for Kerry, that was enough. She did not want to continue her relationship with Cassie. Unfortunately, that plays into the abuser's playbook, because it means that Cassie's more likely to trauma bond back to him, and now she's isolated and hasn't got her best friend, who she was her confidant. And you think morally and ethically you would do this, but when it happens, you might think, well, I don't want to anger him, or I don't want to get her in more trouble, so I'm going to withdraw and not become part of the problem. Or maybe I don't want the drama in my life. I don't want to go out with her because when we go out, he comes along and he creates a scene, and it's not a fun event. Or sometimes people think she's not fun anymore. And Kerry Morgan actually gave testimony to say that Cassie's spark had gone. So we might say that someone's not fun, they're not who they were when you first met, so friends can fall away. So it is actually quite complicated, and the message you want to give to people is very clear of do what you can in those moments. Of course, you want to be safe and you want to make sure that you're not escalating things and making it worse. But in those moments, you're making snap decisions and judgments that you're not consciously processing. You're either doing, you might be freezing, you might be fighting back. If you are the bystander and you're watching it and it's not being done directly to you. But the fact that Kerry Morgan was assaulted and other people shows, if true, and I have no reason to doubt this testimony because it corroborates Cassie's lawsuit and what Cassie said, if it's true, which I believe it is, it shows he's prepared to be violent to other people, not just Cassie.
The challenge here that we won't know until later on is whether or not the testimonies are doing what they're supposed to do, which is prove criminal intent and criminal activity on the part of Diddy Combs, or whether they're backfiring. Because the fact that Cassie could leave the relationship at all shows that she had agency to take her own actions, which could work against the idea that she was being coerced. And then the fact that when she exercised that agency to leave the relationship, she went to another celebrity relationship inside the same sphere of influence.
You think that hurts her case?
That in the eyes of a jury, remember we have to look at this through the eyes of a jury. Through the eyes of a jury, they think like everyday people. They don't think like celebrities do. Celebrities live in a very small universe. You can't be a celebrity and date Joe Blow down the street. You can't be a celebrity and just up and leave your state and go start all over again in Madison, Wisconsin, right? You can't do that. But the average person, especially the kind of person that they're trying to put on this jury, who's disassociated and disconnected with Diddy, that person is sitting there thinking, well, if she could leave once, why couldn't she leave again? And it's not necessarily that they are victim shaming, it's that they can't conceptualize the life that she was living. They can't conceptualize sex parties. They can't conceptualize $20 million. They can't conceptualize $1 million, right? So how are they going to even start to think about the systematic traumatization of not just one individual, but multiple individuals? Diddy had a daughter 5 months before he had twins. So the whole idea that, the rumor that he had several girlfriends isn't a rumor, right? It's a fact.
There's no way of hiding that. Yeah.
People can't relate to getting one person pregnant, getting another person pregnant, and then having the kids in short order with each other, and then being partially with that person, partially not with that. They can't conceptualize that. And that is part of what the defense is looking for as they pick their jurors. Who's going to hear this stuff and say, did he abuse women? Yes. Was he crazy and rich and spoiled? Yes. But did he conspire to create a criminal for-profit business through the sexual trafficking of people across borders? I don't see that evidence. I see lots of him scaring women. I don't see lots of him committing planned trafficking activity to generate profit like an organized criminal syndicate.
So how much does this fame actually contribute to him potentially getting off?
I would say that celebrity is going to play a big role in this. Keep in mind, the president of the United States right now is a convicted criminal in the state of New York.
Oh, yeah, when you put it like that.
And this man is one of the wealthiest moguls in media and entertainment, being tried in New York, one of the most liberal states in the union. Who knows how this is going to turn out? And not only that, but they HSI, the Homeland Security Investigative Group that's leading this investigation, they have brought charges, criminal charges, that will be difficult to prove without detailed records of accounting, detailed text and communication messages to prove the intention and the activity was done with the knowledge and intent and direction of Diddy Combs. If it's somebody else, then it's going to work a different way. Do you know what I mean? And that's not necessarily a mistake on the part of HSI. That's their mandate. That's what makes them relevant in this case.
So has anything been said or anything that you've seen that has massive legs that you think this actually proves that Diddy's guilty without a reasonable doubt?
Not yet. I'm hoping that evidence will come forward. I am personally disappointed that HSI, of all the charges they chose to pursue, they are pursuing organized criminal type charges. If this was all just his expense, him buying prostitutes, him buying drugs, him buying services, there's no criminal organizational activity there. So the racketeering is gone, which is the life sentence is gone. Now there's just trafficking, right? And then in the world of trafficking, unless there's documentation to prove that these people are being trafficked against their will with fraud and with fear and with coercion, unless there's really rock solid evidence there, the trafficking is also gone, which is the other life sentence. That leaves only the prostitution across borders, which has a maximum 10-year sentence. He could be found guilty for prostitution across state borders, but that's not what any of us are thinking about when we think of him. And a 10-year sentence can very quickly become a 1-year sentence, which can very quickly become a 6-month sentence, especially when you've got somebody like this who could potentially be on home custody for 18 months, right? And what's that message? What's the precedent that gets sent to the world from there? Does that make him touchable or untouchable?
But remember, we're not inside the court either, so we don't know how these things are landing. But in my view, the prosecution are doing a good job of literally putting in line by line. They're not overextending, they're just going for the real gets Okay, and also with racketeering and RICO, it's not always about money exchange, it's about gain. And with this case, it's about how Sean Combs gained and the fantasy part of using Cassie and the sex trafficking, bringing other people in, right, transporting for prostitution. And it's about how other people were used to meet his needs. And what the prosecution are showing this week are those people, the assistants giving evidence, Cassie's mum, bringing all these people together to corroborate what Cassie's saying. So, and we have seen this before, we've seen it with R. Kelly. So a lot of people find it difficult to think about what the law is and the standard and the crime and overlay what Sean Combs has done and that being revealed. But I think the prosecution are actually doing a very good case, witness by witness, foundational witnesses and line by line corroborating what Cassie said. But ultimately it'll be up to the jury, right? And we're still only at week 2.
All right, so we'll see what week 3 brings. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I really am excited to see how you continue to break this case down, because this is going to be a definitive case for how our country views celebrities, how it views women's rights, how it views the due process of justice, not just now, but in the future as well. And we've really been struggling with this idea of celebrity and justice for the last 4 to 6 years.
Laura, my co-host, where can people find you?
Definitely listen to Crime Analyst podcast and Instagram at Crime Analyst, YouTube at Crime Analyst. Also, I've got the Crime Analyst squad. So if people want more, they can find me on Patreon, which is patreon.com/Crime Analyst.
Amazing. Guys, we're doing this special series so that we can bring value to you guys if you find yourself in the same situation as Paul Cassie does. So please smash that subscribe button, switch on your notifications, and we are dropping these episodes once a week. So follow along and be a part of this community. Until next time, be the hero of your own life. Peace. To make sure that you never get trapped, that we can start to learn from the bravery that Cassie has, then click here right now and find the hidden signs that you could be in one of those relationships.
And for me, as I said before, this case is all about coercive control and sexual coercion. And what I always see with the case